G'day, mate. Welcome to episode 56 of the Exponential Performance Podcast. In this week's episode, we are announcing the winners of some of our Harden Up project competitions, and we're also digging into Zone 3, often referred to as the up-tempo zone. Let's get into it.
Welcome to the Exponential Performance Podcast. Join sports scientist and performance coach Matty Graham to find out how to train smarter and maximize your performance no matter who you are.
All right, g'day, mate. Welcome to episode 56 of the Exponential Performance Podcast. I hope you've had a good week of training. Nick, how's things at your end?
Things are good, thank you, Matty. Had a 4-day block over the last weekend, just being where I did no biking and pretty much no training, a lot of walking, as I spent some time catching up with some friends and family. And it's amazing how refreshed I feel coming out the other side. It's been a while since I've had a good 4 days off, and it's kind of a nice reminder about recovery days and slowing down and just enjoying yourself again.
Nice. So was that a planned recovery sort of phase? Did you have it in mind that things were coming to crop up and you were going to take some recovery time, or were you just like, I'm going to push through, and then you had to take the recovery time?
I knew the 4 days was coming up where I was going to be away out of town. Me and my partner were traveling up north, and I'd envisioned hiring a bike, getting out, doing some running just to kind of keep the intensity going. But I needed some time off by the time we got there. I was feeling pretty low on the back of the motor tapu. And just just take the 4 days, do some walking, relax, hang out, and amazing how refreshed, like I said, coming out the other side it feels.
Yeah, nice. I mean, yeah, recovery is so underrated, and it's even, for someone like yourself, it's easy to kind of overlook it a little bit, and say, oh, we'll just push through a little bit longer, and then that enforced recovery is sometimes a bit of a blessing in disguise, isn't it?
Oh, totally. It is. Yeah. It's certainly needed. And you can, ability data and some of the data output from a session tonight, just how it's bounced back pretty quick, which is cool.
Excellent. All right. So today we're going to crack straight into the Harden Up project. No stories of amazing survival or epic endurance, but we are going to share some stories that are potentially equally as epic from our listeners. A few weeks ago, we put out the call for your Harden Up stories. We've had a bunch of them coming in, and I've been sending out Harden Up stickers to all those people who have sent in Harden Up stories. I have literally just got another set of stickers back from the printers. So we're back in stock for those people that are waiting for them. This is the third order, so it's getting a little bit crazy. I had originally envisaged just, the proof order that came through, I'd send those out, but everyone keeps sending in their stories, so I felt obliged to keep sending out stickers. So if you have got your stickers, send us in a photo of where you've placed them. It would be cool to see. And if you're still waiting for them, they're not far away. So we had lots of stories coming in, and interestingly, a lot of them included like the weather. So we asked for what was your hardest ever training session, your hardest race, your hardest adventure, whatever it was, your Harden Up story. A lot of them include the rain, biblical rain, as it was described in a number of them, the cold, and block headwinds, or just headwinds in generals, were a big feature of a lot of the Harden Up stories as well. We also got things not going to plan, so races not going to plan, stomach issues, sleep deprivation before races, causing a little bit of havoc there. We had one childbirth story as well, not of the person who sent the story in, but of their wife. Crashes, and people signing up for events just because they heard the Harden Up project segments, which was super cool. To be honest, I couldn't choose a favorite story, as I sort of said I was going to. So what I did is I fell back on the old random selection criteria and just randomly generated a number, had everyone lined up, and got a winner that way, so that everyone was in the draw to win the prize pack, which includes some Sweet Cheek samples from Sweet Cheeks Butt Butter, Hot Cheeks, their warm balm, and also their Sweet Cheeks, what do they call it, Super Balm as well, which is awesome stuff. Some EPC cycling kit, and also some Harden Up merchandise. And the winner is, drum roll please, Glenn Jelly, actually, from down in
Clinton.
Clinton, down in Southland. So Glenn will be in touch anyway. So what I'm going to do now is read out Glenn's Harden Up story. And Glenn writes over on Instagram, if you want to go and find it word for word. First of all, he says, great podcast, guys. So we'll take that as a win. Probably the biggest Harden Up moment next to some of Nick's training sessions. So Glenn's actually one of Nick's athletes. He cites the Contact Classic mountain bike race as his Harden Up, or his hardest race, specifically between two aid stations, or the two aid stations. He said it's very mentally challenging, and he's looking forward to lining up again this year, as he's developed a lot of mentality this year thanks to Nick's training programs. And so I wrote Glenn back and I said, what did he find so mentally hard about that section of the race? Interested to know, as I always am. And Glenn wrote back, it was his first time doing the race, and the hills weren't really at the top of his list. I think it's common with a lot of people. They sort of underestimate the hilliness of the contact effort, because it's just bloody up and down, it goes on and on. And he said they just never really seem to end. And it's definitely true around that backside of the lake. It's just hills after hills after hills. Had been told it was called the Black Hole for a reason. And so he's much better prepared this year, physically and mentally, thanks to Nick's training plans. So that's awesome, Glenn. We will be in touch, and we will get that prize pack out to you. Thanks very much for that Harden Up story. If you want to go and read some of those Harden Up stories, they're over on the Instagram page under episode 52. A lot of people posted them. There's a wee photo of that, and also over on Facebook as well. The second competition that we've been running was over on Facebook, and there was a ton of people out there tagging their mates in this post who need a Harden Up t-shirt to remind them what to do when the going gets tough. And Nick Taylor got posted or tagged a few times in there, but I'm not sure a t-shirt's going to help him, so we'll have to work on other means. But again, we selected this winner of this competition using a random draw, and the winners were two people: the person who tagged and the person who's doing the tagging and the person who was tagged. But was Kirsty Anderson of Dunedin, and she tagged a lot of people actually, but this particular entry that she made, she tagged Scott Payne. So Kirsty and Scott will be in touch to get your sizes for the Harden Up t-shirts. We'll send those out to you, and you'll be equipped to remind yourself to harden up when that going gets tough. Just remember, if you want to get your hands on a Harden Up t-shirt yourself, you can do so simply by writing into your little search bar on your interweb browser, exponentialperformancecoaching.com/shop, as in SHOP, and that'll take you through to where you can view all of the different t-shirts that we have available, including the Harden Up one. So that's the Harden Up project for this week. Next week, we are going to be cracking into what I reckon is an absolute epic tale of survival, and lots of lessons to be learned from it. But now we're going to crack into our heart rate training segment, Zone 3. Nick, over to you.
Cool, thanks, Matty. So Zone 3 is, I guess, officially termed the tempo zone. but is unofficially kind of dubbed the grey zone in a lot of endurance sport and a lot of podcasts that you might tune into. The grey zone is kind of mentioned a lot as a place to kind of stay out of because of the negative effects. But I don't want to paint it in a negative light because, like I said last week, if we consider the analogy of a house, I consider zone 3 to be the windows of your house. Now, most houses are essential, I consider zone 3 to be the windows of the house, and most houses need windows. I spent a night over the weekend in a farmhouse without a window in the bedroom, and it was pretty dark and pretty grey. So, a window is always good. But essentially, zone 3 is 90 to 93% of your lactic threshold heart rate. So quite high in terms of getting close to your heart rate, your lactate threshold, sorry. And I feel like I know when I'm in zone 3 because your breathing changes. So zone 2, you're going along, you're chatting away to people. You might get a wee bit of extra breathing going on as you especially go up a wee bit of a hill. But zone 3, when you're working at that kind of middle of zone 3, you notice that you're breathing heavily. Not as full-on intense that you're gasping for oxygen, like you might be as you get closer to zone 4, 5. But the intensity's lifted. And it's often considered to be kind of the zone that a 2-ish hour to up to 6 hours in terms of racing fits into. Now, that might be in a triathlon, like a half Ironman is probably a good example. If you ignore the fact that you're going to get a spike at the start of your swim, a spike at the start of your bike, and probably towards the end of the run, as you're fatiguing, you might get a further spike. The average across that race will be a zone 3 kind of heart rate average. So therefore, to say don't train in zone 3 is quite an extreme thing to say, especially if your race consists of a block that's in zone 3. So if you're training for a half Ironman, you might be training for a 4 or 5 hour mountain bike race. So like the Moto Tapu the other weekend was sort of, for most people, between sort of 2 hours 45 to 4 hour spectrum. That is zone 3. And if I look back at my heart rate, sort of bang on that 3 hour mark, it's a zone 3 average. So it's quite cool to see that even if you're not trying to stick into a specific zone, that your body sits into that average. Certainly zone 3 is a mixed fueling zone. So 1 and 2 that we've talked about the last couple of weeks are predominantly fat. Now, remembering again, no zone is exclusive to fat or carbohydrate until you're working at the very, very peak maximal exertion. But as you move into zone 3, you're certainly starting to utilize some carbohydrate for your fueling, and you're certainly still utilizing some fat. So keep that in mind from your sort of replenishing or your pre-training snack. Now, if your race consists of a zone 3 or a time point of view, or caused by intensity from hills or a lot of sprinting, sort of surges and bike races, etc., then you need to train in there. Otherwise, you're going to miss out on actually being able to perform in that zone. If you are, however, training for an Ironman that's going to take you 10 to 11 hours plus, long endurance mountain bike racing, long ultra marathon running, etc., then training in the zone 3 can just potentially be not great. So it's a little bit too hard to get a really good metabolic change going on that you're going to benefit from zone 2. It's not hard enough to really kind of try and lift your anaerobic threshold or adapt to processing lactate like it would be if you're closer to your threshold level. So all you end up doing is training kind of hard, not that hard. You might feel good because you're feeling really really fast on the course, but your recovery time takes a long time out the other side. So you get this really sort of funny balance between but not hard enough to get a benefit and then having to recover. So by making sure you know what kind of spectrum that your race is going to entail, enables you to tailor your training towards that. And especially as you get closer and closer to that event, the general rule of thumb would be the closer you are towards the event, the more specific towards that event, the more specific your training should be towards that event. So if you're doing a sprint triathlon that might take you an hour, you're not going to be out there riding for 6 hours in a time trial position because there's no need. But in your base training, you might be on your bike for 4 or 5 hours to get some of those metabolic zone 2 changes going on. So in terms of an example of what a zone 3 session might look like, might incorporate a bit of a warm-up, 10-15 minutes, get the blood flowing, a few little accelerations, whether it be running, biking, or kayaking, and then into some tempo intervals of somewhere between 10 and 20 minutes long. You might branch that out a little bit longer if you're doing a race that's going to be sort of 3-4 hours plus. And your recovery time from that interval should be in that kind of 1/4-ish time of your interval. So if your interval's 20 minutes, then your recovery time is going to be 5 minutes. And that's a general sort of block, and you might do 2 or 3 of them. Probably not looking to do much more than 60 minutes total at your zone 3 across your session. So like I said, tonight, in preparation for this podcast, I went out and did a zone 3 ride just to remind myself of how it felt. I knew I had about an hour, so about 10-minute warm-up, 30 minutes at zone 3, and then I spent another sort of 15 minutes or so cooling down, spinning the legs, and having a bit of a technical play. And that's a really good session to do for me coming into the Epic, where it's hopefully going to take me 6 hours. So I'll be pushing, a lot of my time will be spent at zone 3, creeping into zone 4 on the climbs that Maddie was talking about before. The only thing I would say about zone 3 is because of that higher intensity, it's a very easy place to burn out from. If you go out, most sort of group bunch rides or group runs tend to sneak up into that zone 3 quite easily as sort of people are having a bit of a go. Oh, I'm going to chase them down to those traffic lights or whatever it might be. So you do have to watch that if you're not specifically structuring your training with zones, that you don't spend too much time in the zone 3 area all the time and you end up burning out all the time. So if you're falling into that kind of repeat burning out sort of cycle of build up, feeling really good, oh, I have to have a week off because I'm feeling shit. Build up, and so forth, then you might just be getting that mixture wrong. And I encourage you to pull back a little bit, spend a bit more time at a lower intensity, and then pick 1 or 2 sessions each week to go hard and give it heaps.
Yeah, I think that's a really good point in that zone 3 training, like you say, is really beneficial at the right time, for the right race. And I think what a lot of people do is they fall into the trap, and potentially why it's referred to as the grey zone is that naturally you'll fall into that intensity if you're just going out and quote unquote training based on how you feel on the day, because zone 2 usually feels a little bit easy. And if you get someone to sort of subjectively guess where they are in terms of their intensity for a zone 2, they'll naturally fall into zone 3 usually because it feels quite strong. You're puffing a little bit. Your pace is actually quite good in terms of your averages or your speed. You're feeling quite strong. It feels quite good. You can sustain it for quite a long period of time. And so a lot of the times people just go out and that's the intensity they'll hit every single session. So if you're doing that, then like Nick said, you're not getting the zone 2 adaptations that you're after. Well, you are getting them, but you're just getting extra fatigue with them. And then you're not getting the zone 4 adaptations, which we'll talk about next week. So you're just sort of ending up the sort of moderate pace and overly fatigued for the benefits that you're getting. So my main suggestion would be is if you're using zone 3, then use it very specifically and calculated in terms of when you're going to use it. Times that I think is really good to use is after you've got a really good base phase done of that zone 2 work, and there's a transitioning period into, if you want to call it speed phase or early season intensity preparation, whatever that might be, when you're transitioning from long, steady aerobic training into that faster, high intensity training to build your anaerobic threshold. During that transition period, rather than going from woe to go, so to speak, and having this massive jump of intensity, is to prepare your body for that gradually by using some zone 3 work through that transition. Also, if you're going to be trialing race nutrition stuff, I think using that sort of hard, sustained intensity work during some sessions where you're wanting to trial race nutrition sort of under some duress, zone 3, hit out, hammer pretty hard, and sort of know what it's like to consume all that race nutrition during some actual sort of intensity. Because zone 2, you can usually eat just about anything in zone 2. Have a massive feed on, whatever you're doing. But when you start to push a little bit harder, that's when it's kind of harder to get things down. You have to keep the pressure on. You've got to need your hands on those handlebars a little bit more. And it's hard to get things and just sort of work out the logistics of eating, but then also how it feels in your stomach as well. So using some of that zone 3 work to test out race nutrition, I think it is really good as well. And as Nick said, if you've got a race that is that sustained intensity for that prolonged period of time, well, then you need to get that zone 3 dialed in as well. So use it strategically, use it at the right time with a purpose, and I think you can get the benefits from it rather than just, casually moving in and out of zone 3 because that's what feels comfortable.
Yeah, perfect. And something you touched on that I had meant to mention around purpose, and I guess it will sum up as we go across the next 2 stages too, but having a purpose for every session you do, and that purpose might just be, hey, I'm going to go out and have fun today with my mates. That's great. That's your purpose. You don't worry about your heart rate. You don't worry too much about your distance or duration. You might even put your Garmin or whatever you're using in your bag and just go for a ride or a run and have some fun. But if you're doing zone work, it needs to have a purpose. And to pull it all together, you need to understand the whole concept really of what zone training is all about, because it's so easily misunderstood and gotten wrong. So
nice.
So I think at the end of these next 2 podcasts, we'll sit down and just kind of tie it all together with a bit of a recap, give you some ideas of sessions for each zone and how to tie them together. And I know we've had a lot of questions coming through around how to utilize the zones, different nutritional questions about the zones as well. And we certainly will get to answering them in that recap session as well.
Excellent. Yeah. Having that purpose behind each training session is the fundamental of training. And I mentioned it back in episode 54 of the podcast. And I'm pretty sure I said it in the podcast. If not, it's back there on Facebook and Instagram where I write a wee description about each podcast episode. But that training is the systematic use of exercise to improve performance. So if you're going out and what you're doing is not systematic, you don't have a goal around the sessions, there's not a strategic approach to each session to how it builds on to the bigger picture, then you're not actually training. You're just exercising. And exercising is perfectly fine if your goal is, let's say, weight loss or just general health and fitness. But if you're looking at improving performance, then training really does need to have that systematic and strategic approach to it. And I think as well, understanding those energy systems, and I've been banging on about energy systems for the last three weeks, but they go hand in hand with training zones, because when you think about the anaerobic glycolytic energy system and the aerobic energy system and how they link together, when you're training in zone 3, we're getting the anaerobic glycolytic system starting to pump out a reasonable amount of lactate or lactic acid, and the aerobic energy system is revving at quite a high rate as well. So it's kind of like both energy systems are working quite hard, and there's that balance and that mixed fueling that Nick talked about. The aerobic system isn't just able to metabolize fat anymore. Got to start chucking in some more carbohydrate there, and also up in the anaerobic glycolytic system because it's working so hard. Because both of those energy systems are working at quite a high intensity, then that fatigue follows after that. And we're not stressing that anaerobic glycolytic system much. So it's not actually improving that aspect of our energy system much at all because it's not under much stress. The aerobic energy system is not working that much harder than it was in our aerobic energy system, and what is not working that much harder than it was in zone 2. So it's not actually stressing it much more than it was, but it's just both of them working sort of at quite high rates is what we're sort of getting. So we're not getting anything more really than we were in zone 2, and we're not getting what we would at a higher zone 4 intensity. So it gets this sort of mix mash of intensity that gives us some performance improvement for sure when we're looking at targeting that. But a lot of people will just naturally fall into that zone as a bit of a feel good, felt like you worked hard sort of intensity. Hopefully we haven't made all of this training zone stuff too complicated for you. Our aim is to hopefully empower you with the knowledge that you can apply to your own training to refine it. But if you want to take that thinking out of your training, as I know a lot of people kind of do, so you want a structured training plan, but without, the price tag that comes along with the personalized training programs that Nick and I offer, head over and check out the range of training plans over at exponentialperformancecoaching.com/plans. There's a wide range of plans over there, and all of them are designed with these training zones in mind to use the right training zone at the right time to get the specific training adaptations that we're after. There are plans over there for specific events or just general training build-ups as well. If you can't find a training plan that suits your needs, let us know and we will do our best to see what we can come up with for you. If you found this podcast helpful, it would be awesome if you could head over to iTunes and leave us a review over there. That just helps increase the rating of this podcast and increase the reach of it, which will help it be sustainable into the future. We really appreciate the reviews that are written over there, and we do read them all, so please keep them coming. If you would like to help shape the future direction of this podcast, send us in a question. A voice question is preferred. You can send those in over at exponentialperformancecoaching.com/ask. Or if you don't want to send in a voice question, hit us up with a text question over on our website, via email, Instagram, or over on Facebook. Like Nick said, we have had a lot of these questions coming in around training zones, which is obviously topical at the moment with us doing our wee series on that. But if you have questions about anything else, send those through as well. We will be tackling those heart rate training zone related questions in a big listener Q&A at the end of the series. Make sure you don't miss out on any of our upcoming podcast episodes by subscribing over on YouTube or SoundCloud or whatever podcast platform you listen on. Come on over to the Exponential Performance Coaching Facebook page or find us over on Instagram to continue the conversation. I'm at Matty EPC and Nick is at its_a_Nicks_life. Until next time, get out there and train hard, but most importantly, train smart. We'll talk to you next week. Mate, thanks for listening. If you would like to support this podcast and see it continue into the future, you can do so in a number of ways. Firstly, make sure you subscribe to this channel on whatever platform you are listening. Like and share the podcast on social media to help spread the word. If you're feeling really generous, head over and leave a review and a rating over on iTunes. This helps spread the word and develop the podcast. Make sure you check out the range of t-shirts we have over at the Exponential Performance Podcast store, and this includes the Harden Up t-shirts. All the profits from these will go straight back into the podcast directly to help the production of it. Or if you would like to make a small $1 donation, you can do so over at the exponentialperformancecoaching.com/donate page. All of this will help the podcast continue long into the future so we can keep bringing you the information you need to train hard, but most importantly, train smart. We'll talk to you next week.